Hi, welcome to the Bible and American History. Today I have an article from the Founders Bible, which I'm going to read to you. It's called, "He Trains My Hands for War." Beyond the gifts of the Holy Spirit that many of us would be familiar with, 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 11, the Bible teaches that God bestows various talents and giftings upon individuals, including that of musician, 1 Samuel 16:18 and 23, 1 Chronicles 23, verse 5, chapter 25, verse 7, artisan, found in 1 Kings, chapter 5, 8 through 9, hunter, found in the book of Genesis 25:27, jeweler, found in Exodus 35, verse 33, engraver, found in Exodus 15 and the Psalms, civil ruler, found in Genesis 41, 41 and 42, Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 14, Daniel chapter 2, verse 48, and orator, found in Acts 18:26. One gift that is rarely acknowledged today, but is a gift that God specifically affirms in Psalm 144, verse 1, is being a skilled soldier. "Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle." That, too, is a direct and sovereign gifting of God. Military subjects and issues are talked about repeatedly throughout both the Old and the New Testaments. Even John the Baptist gave specific instructions for soldiers and officers as he was baptizing, found in the book of Luke, chapter 3, verses 12 through 16, and included throughout the Biblical Hall of Fame in Hebrews, chapter 11, are numerous military figures held up to us as examples for our emulation. In early America, the role of a soldier was definitely recognized, appreciated, and honored as a specific calling from God. One indication of this was the annual artillery sermon. Beginning in the 1630s, each year, the local militia would assemble to elect its officers and leaders, and on that occasion a minister would address them from the scriptures about military issues suitable to the occasion. But the annual artillery sermon was just one recognition of Psalm 144, verse 1. The military was frequently the subject of many other famous sermons. For example, in 1745, the Reverend George Whitefield, a leading figure in America's national rival, known as the First Great Awakening, preached a special sermon to troops deploying under General William Pepperrell to fight at Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia during King George's War. Whitefield addressed the soldiers from 1 Samuel 22, verse 2, everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to David, and he became captain over them. As his biographer reported, he spiritualized the subject and told them how distressed sinners came to Jesus Christ, the Son of David, and in his application exhorted the soldiers to behave like the soldiers of David, and the officers to act like David's worthies. After this, he preached to the general himself. Significantly, the Reverend Whitefield also created their military motto, "If Christ be captain, no fear of defeat." Another significant military sermon occurred in 1755 during the French and Indian War, when the Reverend Samuel Davies, considered the greatest pulpit preacher in American history, preached religion and patriotism, the constituents of a good soldier. In that famous sermon, he pointed out a young Colonel George Washington as an example to illustrate how God often sovereignly intervened to help soldiers. Battle of Lexington. Another famous one occurred in September 1775 as 1,000 American soldiers were deploying from Massachusetts on a military expedition against the British. Before setting out, they gathered to hear a special sermon at the First Presbyterian Church in Newburyport, the church in which the Reverend Whitefield had been buried at his death in 1770. With drums beating, the troops formed 2 lines leading into the church. The chaplain of those troops, the Reverend Samuel Spring, walked down the line and stepped into the pulpit. The troops then stacked their weapons in the aisle, and the Reverend Spring preached to the soldiers from Exodus 33. In that passage, God was leading his people to the promised land. But Moses told God, "If your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here," found in verse 15. Spring applied that passage to the pending mission. Following the sermon, the troops silently and in awe descended to the basement of the church where the body of the Reverend Whitefield had been entombed, buried in his clerical robes. They lifted the lid off his sarcophagus, looked down on the remains of the great preacher, and soldier after soldier cut off a small piece of his robe to carry with them into battle, for they all considered him a spiritual mentor of their profession. The next year, in 1776, the Reverend Jonas Clark preached a famous military sermon about the battle at Lexington. The previous year, in 1775, 700 British soldiers had set out from Boston and encountered a few dozen Americans at Lexington Green. When the smoke lifted after the battle, there were 18 American casualties, including both black and white patriots. Significantly, the American troops in that battle, including the wounded and dead, had been from Pastor Clark's church. There are many other examples, but military-oriented sermons were a regular part of the American church practice for centuries, for the simple reason that the Bible recognizes this as an important God-ordained vocation. Christians today should regain the perspective that just as God gives special skills to individuals, he makes clear in Psalm 144, verse 1, that he also specifically gifts certain individuals to be effective soldiers. And that is our reading. Thank you for listening.